Hi, I'm Craig Rochelle, the pastor of Life Church, and it's my honor to introduce to you two brothers who are business consultants, researchers, entrepreneurs, and best-selling authors, Chip and Dan Heath. In 2007, Chip and Dan co-authored their first book, Made to Stick: Why Some Ideas Survive and Others Die, explaining what makes an idea or concept memorable or interesting. Impacting business leaders and ministry leaders around the world, Made to Stick quickly became a New York Times, Wall Street Journal, and Business Week bestseller. Chip is a popular professor at Stanford's Graduate School of Management. His unique research on what makes ideas succeed has been featured in Business Week and on the Today Show.
We want our ideas to stick. We better get the visuals in there. We better get concrete images. We better talk about real people.
Dan is an insightful and engaging communicator with an MBA from Harvard Business School and is the co-founder of ThinkWell, a publisher of innovative textbooks. Chip and Dan have consulted with all sorts of businesses, including Microsoft, Nestle, Nissan, Macy's, the American Heart Association, and Nike. These two brothers have a new book coming out called Switch, which is our topic for today, discussing how to change when change is hard. Would you please give a warm welcome to Chip and Dan Heath. Well, Chip and Dan, it's such an honor to have you with us. Your first book, Made to Stick, it was a gift to churches around the world. I know I had my whole team read it, and all of my peers. We were so excited about your work, and your new book, I believe, is going to be exceptionally helpful as well. I do want to just welcome all of you at all of our satellite sites all over the world. We're so glad to have you with us, and to really benefit from the wisdom of these great two men, I'd like to just start by asking all of you a question as we're kind of wrestling with all of the challenging topics and how God is unsettling us in really a beautiful way. I know a lot of you right now, you may see some things in your own life where you'd say, this really needs to change. Or you may be looking at your business or at your ministry and recognizing, man, could I really bring change in this area? What I'd like you to do right now is just think about something about yourself or your ministry or your business that you really believe needs to change. As you do that, let me just ask and make sure you're with me. All of our Willow satellite sites, everybody, if you've got something you know really needs to change, would you raise your hands right now? Just raise them up and say, there's something fantastic. I want you to listen to everything that these men say and let that filter through what you believe really needs to change. And so let's just go ahead and start talking. Your book, the new book, is truly amazing. The book is entitled Switch: How to Change When Change is Hard. Speaking of change, we were talking just a few minutes ago, and Dan, you've had a little bit of change in your life recently, huh?
I have. I got married about 6 months ago.
Way to go, big man. Way to go. Congratulations to you.
That's very kind of you. I'll send you the link to my wedding registry.
There you go.
Yeah, no, I got married to a wonderful woman named Amanda from a little town called Beulahville in North Carolina. And I'm actually, the entire town's here.
The entire town is here.
It's incredible. Wow. But I'm feeling really bad for Amanda at this moment because literally right now she is taking the GRE, which is this grueling 4-hour entrance exam for grad school. And so while I'm here having fun talking to you, she's coming up with the antonym from some obscure vocabulary word. Lugubrious or something, I don't know.
Yeah.
So
how did he do? Did he marry up?
The family is a big fan of Amanda. We knew it was serious, actually, I think even before Dan did, because he was dating a woman who liked country and western music. And the rest of our family loves country and western, but country and western doesn't appear on Dan's iPod. And so the fact that he was actually going out for a long, extended period of time with a woman that loved country and western music was a sign that this was serious.
And so now you're going to get your dog back and your truck back and all that kind of stuff.
That's right.
Yeah.
So it was really fun working on this book about change as my life was changing all around me. I'm coming to understand that there are certain things that husbands have to be trained on.
You just made a lot of ladies believe in you right then.
You mean it's not okay to drink directly from the milk jug? That's not.
No, and put the toilet lid down. The toilet lid goes down. That's
Good
a
advice,
big,
yeah.
big thing. It's important.
So, you know, the thing that strikes me is when Chip and I talk to people about change, their first reaction is always this knee-jerk, oh, well, people hate change or people resist change. But I didn't. I mean, I signed up for this change. I volunteered for it. And all of you out there, I bet there are thousands of people in the audience today that have had kids. And let me tell you something. If your goal in life was to minimize the amount of change that you experience, you have made a terrible mistake. And so this was sort of the mystery, really, that led us to switch, is this realization that there are certain kinds of changes in the world that are really big, getting married, switching jobs, having kids, using new technologies, that seem to happen almost effortlessly. But then there are these other kinds of changes, losing that last 5 pounds or changing things at work, that seem to be excruciating. And why is that?
Yeah, see, that's really interesting, and the same can be true in ministries as well. Sometimes it seems like the smallest things are most difficult to change, and people lose their jobs over trying to move something on the stage. And so in your book, you had a really, some of you, I deliver pizza now for a living, and it can be tough. In your book, you had a really interesting metaphor about an elephant, a rider, and a path. Can you guys kind of tell us about that?
Well, the thing that we noticed about change is filled with conflict. So part of us wants to save for retirement, and then another part of us wants to buy something fun, or part of us wants to diet and eat better, but another part really wants a cookie. And so there's this constant battle that's set up in any change situation. We face that anytime we want to change our workplaces or our churches or our communities. Part of us sees the need for change, and we want to change something. But then part of us resists, likes the status quo. And the best metaphor that we've heard of for thinking about this is a metaphor by John Haidt, who's a psychologist at the University of Virginia, and he uses it to talk about our brains and two systems in our brains. And one system is the planning, long-run, thinker, planner system, and the other is the doer, energy system. And he talks about a human rider sitting on top of a 6-ton elephant. And the thing about that image is it captures the conflict of change precisely. You can have the human rider that's thinking about, here's where we need to go, but that elephant is 6 tons of mass. And if the elephant doesn't want to move, the elephant doesn't move. And so part of change is aligning the goals of the elephant and the rider. And that's what's difficult so often in change, because we convince the rider, and a lot of times when we want to start to change, I mean, I'm pretty sure that Dan, when he proposed to Amanda, didn't start off with an economic cost-benefit analysis of the cost savings of living together on food preparation and the tax consequences of being married. I mean, he started with an emotional appeal. And that's what we find that characterizes successful change, is the rider has to convince the elephant that there's some goal out there that's worthy of changing. So one of my favorite stories in the book is Crystal Jones is a first grade teacher teaching in an inner city school. A lot of kids come into first grade in that school district unprepared. They don't recognize their letters. And she knows that she wants to set them on the path to doing well in junior high school and to graduating from high school. But you can't talk to a group of first graders about, I want to set you up for success later on in junior high school and close the achievement gap so that you're more likely to graduate from high school. It means nothing to a first grader. And so here's what Crystal Jones did that appealed to the elephants of a first grade class. She said, if you stick with me, if you're willing to work hard, we're going to make you third graders by the end of this year. Now, you've got to imagine for a first grader, walking around on the playground with those third graders is like, how we think when we see Olympic athletes, the grace and the beauty of the Olympic athletes. Yeah. A first grader looks at a third grader, and that's what it feels like to a first grader. And what Crystal Jones is saying to them is not that I can make you as strong or as tall as a third grader, but if you work hard, you can be as smart as a third grader by the end of the year. And sure enough, midway through the year, the kids had achieved enough that they held a little graduation ceremony and became second graders, because all of them had mastered the first grade curriculum in the first few months of the school year. And by the end of the school year, 80 or 90% of her kids were reading and doing math at a third grade level. And that's a brilliant example of change, because she managed to reach past the intellectual arguments that a lot of us would have made in that situation and tap into something that really motivated for the long term the kids that she needed to reach with that change. Yeah,
that's fascinating to me, because I think a lot of us in our own lives, we've got that 6,000-pound elephant, and some of you might say, well, that's our deacon board or whatever, And with the rider wants to go somewhere, but the elephant just won't go. And so I want to unpack that more, but let's move this just to a moment to a more specific example that, and people can contextualize it where they are. We've got a lot of business leaders, we've got some ministry leaders, so let me ask this from a ministry perspective, but they can easily adapt this. Let's say that we've got 9 major ministries underneath the local church, and let's say that 2 are working exceptionally well. Let's say that 5 are kind of marginal, they're okay, and then 2 are just failing miserably. And let me tell you, in our world, what most people would say is, you've got to go after the bottom 2 and make them better. What advice would you have, Dan?
Ignore the bottom 2, and in fact, ignore the middle 5, and go straight for those 2 that are working and do some investigating.
Okay, now, hang on, because this you're going to push us. You would ignore the weakest 2, and you would even ignore the 5 that are working.
That's right.
And you would focus on the main 2.
Absolutely. I mean, if you're running a nuclear power plant, it's fine to sit around and wait for something bad to happen and focus on that. But if you're in a time of change, there's going to be a lot of stuff that's not working. And so you've got to flip your mindset and start looking for what is working. Those things are the bright spots, which is something, a term we use in the book to mean these are the things that prove to you that success is possible. And when you find a bright spot, your mission is to study it and to clone it. So I'll give you an example. There's a kind of therapy that uses this bright spots philosophy. So we all know traditional psychotherapy is all about the problems. You know, you obsess about your problems and you talk about your childhood and you spend, 5 years on the couch and $50,000, and at the end of all that you figure out mom's fault. It's all mom's fault. But there's another branch of therapy that is totally different. These therapists don't care about your problems. They don't care about your childhood. All they care about is the solution. In fact, it's called solution-focused brief therapy. And they find those solutions by looking for the bright spots in your own experience. So if they're working with an alcoholic, they'll say, what was the last time you were sober, even if it was just for a few hours? What was different about those hours? Or if they're working with a couple that's having marital problems, they'll say, what was the last time the 2 of you were really clicking? And what was different about that circumstance? Because, see, these bright spots are the proof that these individuals are capable of solving their problems, even if it's just for a short period of time.
Yeah, see, I don't want anybody to miss that, because if you think about this, especially in the church world, we tend to focus on those areas that are weakest. And if you will look at your ministry, there may be one bright spot amongst everything else where God is really working. And I think the worth of this whole session for a lot of people could be right then. Go with the bright spots. Go with where God is working. And we've been often trained not to do so. So could you just expand a little more and can you give me a specific example of how someone found a bright spot and made maybe a significant change because of a bright spot?
Yeah, I'll tell you, one of my favorite stories in the book is about a guy named Jerry Sternin who worked for an organization called Save the Children. A lot of you are probably familiar with them. He was sent to Vietnam to tackle child malnutrition. Now, talk about a thorny problem to be sent to tackle. I mean, what causes malnutrition? Well, poverty, lack of education, lack of access to clean water, lack of sanitation systems. And so Sternin dove into all this research about these problems, and eventually he said, look, all this stuff is TBU. True, but useless. Because there's nothing he can do as one man about the sanitation systems in Vietnam. There's nothing he can do about poverty. So here's what he did do. He went into one village and he gathered all the mothers around and he said, I'd like to start a project here to ensure that your children are better nourished. Will you help me? And they were mothers, so they said, sure, we'll help. And he said, okay, well, our first mission is to go around and do a bit of research. Let's visit every child in this village and see what their height is, what their weight is. Let's just gather some data. And so they did that. They went out, gathered their data. They came back together. And Sternin said, were there any children on your list that seemed to be perfectly well nourished? They were healthy for their age. So they went through the list. And yeah, there are a lot of those children. Okay, well, of those children that were healthy, are there any of them whose parents don't have any more resources than the rest of you? And they looked through the list. And yeah, there are several of those kids. And so Sternin said, well, aha. Those are our bright spots. We need to go figure out what those kids' parents are doing differently. And so they began to go shadow these mothers, and it very quickly became apparent that they were indeed doing things differently. Like they were serving their children 4 small meals a day rather than 2 big ones, which was the norm. And that turned out to be important because a malnourished stomach can only process so much food at one time. They were also serving very different kinds of foods. So the typical meal was a bowl of very pure white rice. But these bright spot moms were sprinkling in tiny shrimp and crabs from the fields. And that was thought to be an adult food. They were also sprinkling in sweet potato greens, which was thought to be kind of a low-class food. But whatever your opinion of these foods, what these mothers were really doing is adding protein and vitamins to these kids' diets. So no surprise that they were healthy. So it was a revelation to these other mothers that there was a way to use the same resources that all the other families had to better serve their children. These practices began to spread. They formed cooking groups to learn how to prepare these new meals. The practices began to spread from village to village like an innovation that catches on, to the point where years later, these practices had eventually reached 2.2 million people across 265 villages. And let's not forget what the beginning point of this story was. So one guy went into a village and looked for what was working.
See, that's so amazing. In fact, when I read that, and it was my assignment to read the book to prepare to interview, I read it in one setting because I couldn't put it down. And right after that, I went back to our team, and I just did the whole TBU. What are the things that we're spend a lot of time on that's true but useless? Let's put that aside. And I made a list. Let's look at what are the areas in our ministry that God is blessing, and what can we throw behind this? And there are some new things that we're going to be doing that we would have never done had we not stopped to ask those questions. So I think it's such a valuable thought. Now, I've got to ask you about this quote, because you wrote in Switch, and when you wrote this, it jumped off the page, and everything in me wants to believe this is true, because if it's true, it can revolutionize the way we approach leadership. And this is what you wrote. Big problems are rarely solved with commiserately big solutions. Instead, they're most often solved by a sequence of small solutions. There's a clear asymmetry between the scale of the problem and the scale of the solution. And you wrote, big problem, small solution. Chip, can you convince me this is true? Because this is so amazing.
Well, I think it almost has to be true, because anytime we tackle a change situation, the writer's supposed to be providing direction. But in a big situation, the writer gets bogged down in true but useless analysis. And so the writer's no help when confronting a really big situation. And the elephant, how does the elephant feel when the elephant is here and you tell him that the destination is over here, right? The elephant feels demoralized. And so the advantage of small solutions and small starts is that you shrink that change so that the elephant all of a sudden starts to feel motivated and the rider starts to see a direction. So give you an example. There's a community called Minor County, South Dakota. It's an agricultural community in the United States. For years, because the farming business has gone downhill overall in the country, this community has been declining. The population is aging. Kids feel like if you want to make a career for yourself, you have to move away from your family, out of Minor County to the big city to make a career as a doctor or a lawyer or a business person. And the community was sitting there feeling their community fragmenting, and yet feeling like we want to do something about that. But that's a big change. Now, there was a high school coach who was teaching an economics class to high school students. And the high school students started doing some research. And what they found out is that if every resident of Minor County just spent 10% more of their money in Minor County as opposed to driving, they would drive an hour away to go for their big shopping trips because the bigger malls were in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. And so they said, if you just spent 10% more, one dime out of every dollar in Minor County, our tax revenues would go up by $8 million. And think of all we could do to attract new businesses to Minor County with that $8 million. We could revamp the downtown. We could start trying to attract new businesses to come in. So they did that. They proposed that. The high school students stood up in front of an auditorium with 110 adults. And if you can imagine the emotion and the inspiration of a high school student saying, we want to live here for the rest of our life, but we've got to get started somewhere. Let's just spend 10% more of our money here. The next year, the tax revenues of Minor County went up not by $8 million, which was what they were asking for. They went up by $15 million.
Wow.
The community had outperformed. And they used that $15 million to start trying to attract new businesses. They tried an organic beef business that didn't quite work out. But they eventually stumbled on wind turbine repair. And it turns out that one thing that farmers are really good at is working with big machinery that's broken. And so the skill set for Minor County was just perfect for this emerging green technology business. Tax revenues in Minor County have been going up for a decade since that high school student presentation. And in the last few years, it's been one of the first years in about 50 years that Minor County has actually increased in population. So people are starting to move to Minor County to work in these new businesses. That's an example of a big change that started out with a very small solution. And I don't think you would have gotten anybody to tackle the whole big problem, but 10% more of my money, I can do that. I can start there.
See, I want to press you a little more on this, but first, I just want to just acknowledge there are so many people here right now that we would say we're facing really big problems in business and in ministry, the economic downturn. It's forcing us to change the way we do a lot of different things. And so many of us, we feel like there's just too much. There's no way that we could, how can we possibly make changes big enough to handle all these things that are taking place? So if what you're saying is true, and I believe it is, I hope that you feel encouraged right now where you are, that if you seek God, that this big problem can actually be solved by maybe just one voice of the Spirit, one idea. And so let me just ask you a follow-up question. Let's say in the ministry world, let's say we've got a strong junior high ministry, strong high school ministry, but when people graduate from college, they don't come back. We're losing our 20-somethings, we're not attracting them. I think in the book you called it shrinking the change. How could you shrink the change in order to do something with this group that we're losing and not reaching for Christ?
Well, if you start thinking about that problem and you let yourself get too bogged down in the analytics, I mean, reaching 20-somethings is really hard. These are busy people. They're trying to start a life. They've got their own apartment that they're trying to start up and learn how to do a household. They're trying to form a career at work. They're trying to find somebody that they might marry and spend the rest of their life with. It's a complicated time in life. But the question you ask yourself is, could I shrink that change? Could I get that ministry started somehow? And so suppose that you started a Bible study group one time a week on a topic like, how do you maintain integrity in the workplace? How do you keep that integrity as you're working? That's a topic that might appeal. Suppose you have it one night a week. Suppose you locate it downtown where it's convenient for people to get to after their work. Suppose you make it on Tuesday nights, so you're not interfering with the weekend activities that might lead you to find that person you want to spend the rest of your life with. And if you feel yourself starting to get more optimistic that, wow, that might work, that's a sign that you've reached the elephant. That's a sign that you've taken the rider and provided direction to the rider to give them momentum in a situation where you might otherwise be paralyzed. That's the feeling you're working for. If you find yourself getting demoralized and shrinking down in your chair when you think about the magnitude of this problem, that's a sign that you haven't done the right change, the right degree of shrinking the change.
And I think that's how a lot of people feel.
Yeah.
We've tried and we feel like we can't do this. And so if there's some way we can get some small victory, we feel like we can get this 6,000-pound elephant to move.
That's right.
Yeah, and just to be real honest, in what many of us do, oftentimes we get really frustrated and really depressed because sometimes it seems like not only can we not just change ourselves, but we can't get anybody else to move at all. And you know, we preach and we do programs and we pray and we do all this stuff, but yet it seems like some people just won't change. And sometimes you'll see progress. They'll start moving forward spiritually, and then they fall off the path. Once we get the elephant to listen to the rider, what can we do to keep them moving in the right direction?
I think we owe it to people to prepare them for adversity. So that when they hit tough times, they know what to expect. Because our elephant, that emotional side of us, is skittish and lazy. Or maybe I should just speak for my own elephant. My elephant is skittish and lazy. And if the elephant hits tough times, it's going to be tempted to leave the path altogether. Well, so how do you avoid that? There's an example I love from the business world. There's a company called IDEO that some people consider the best design firm on earth. And they do really huge projects, designing consumer electronics and reinventing hotels and re-engineering airport security. Although I'm not sure.
Which desperately needs.
Yeah, I don't think they cracked that one, to be honest. So when IDEO starts a new project, they bring together their whole team along with the client. They come together in a room. And then the team leader goes to the whiteboard and draws a U-shaped curve, if you can picture that. And he says, you know, this is, oh wow, we have the U-shaped curve, look at that. He says, this is what you're about to experience on this project. He says, you're going to start out on a high, and that high is hope. That's the hope that we're going to crack this problem. It's the excitement of getting to deal with new ideas and new solutions. And we're going to end on a high, too. And that second peak is confidence. It's the confidence that we nailed this thing, that we put in the hard work, the effort to really get this problem right. But it's not just going to feel like a hop from peak 1 to peak 2. There's going to be a dip in the middle. There's going to be a valley, and that valley is called insight. And the insight period can be really tough. It can be discouraging. It can be depressing, because insight won't come as quickly as we'd like it to come. It won't come as easily. But we have to struggle through that, because it's that struggle that will allow us to get to that second peak.
Yeah, now, I love the fact that you just called the valley insight, because I call that hell. You know,
the valley of hell.
Yeah,
I
mean, let's be honest. It seems like so much. I mean, we do in ministry or in our business, we get this progress, and then boom, all of a sudden it seems like the wheels come off, and people leave, or we get frustrated. And for you to call that insight is, I mean, that's totally reframing, I think, what many of us would see. Because when we do start to fail, it's hard to press through that. Right. In changing, how do you deal with the setbacks and the failures when you start off and you have momentum, and then the train wrecks?
Well, think about the way people interpret tough times. So the people on this IDEO team, if they hit a real struggle in the middle of the project, they're going to think to themselves, oh, this is the valley of insight. This is the valley of hell. Like, I'm in it. I was forecast that this was going to happen. This is part of the process. But if they hadn't been forewarned about that, they might interpret the signals very differently. They may start to think, I'm no good at this. This is too hard. We're failing. This path is not worth persisting on. When I think about persistence, I think about somebody like Tiger Woods. I mean, here's a guy who won more golf tournaments than anybody in history, faster than anyone in history, and then he decided that his golf swing needed an overhaul. I mean, if there was anybody on earth who had no business rocking the boat, it was Tiger Woods. And there's a researcher at Stanford named Carol Dweck who says that the people like Tiger Woods have what's called the growth mindset. And what she means by that is that these people view their talents and their skills, in essence, the way they view muscles, in the sense that by working them out, they will get better. So, I mean, you and I know, if we go to the gym every day for 6 months and we do bicep curls, our biceps will get bigger, right? I mean, that is clearly not the way I'm spending my time, but we know with certainty that that's possible. It's not guesswork. Well, the people with the growth mindset feel that way about everything in their life. They feel that with work, I can become a better listener in my marriage. With work, I can become a better Christian. With work, I can become more socially responsible. Mm-hmm. And that sounds great. I imagine a lot of us in the audience, think we aspire to be that way. But here's the real catch. This is why it's hard. Built into that mindset is a tolerance for failure. Because when we go to the gym and we do those bicep curls.
Let me stop you. That's too good to miss. Built into that whole process is a tolerance for failure. And I think if there's one thing that would be at the top ring of things that ministry leaders certainly need, is a tolerance for failure. Because we often equate failing as missing God, when what you're telling me is that failing could actually be a necessary step in success.
Yeah, well, you always hear this quote, hey, team, failure is not an option here. That's ridiculous. In a time of change, failure is a necessity. Mm-hmm. If you are trying to make your biceps bigger, you are going to go to that gym and work up to failure until you can't lift the bar anymore. And if you're going to have the growth mindset about multiple areas of your lives, you're going to have to keep pursuing being a better listener, being a better employee, being a better Christian to the point of failure. That's how you get stronger. Mm-hmm. So failure is not something to be avoided. In fact, in a weird way, failure may actually be an early warning sign for success. Mm-hmm. Because
so many of you right now, you can go, there's a warning right now, a lot of warning. Yeah. This is so encouraging, and because I think I think some people may need to be empowered to fail. Be set free. Go fail some.
I can teach them if they need help.
Yeah. Yeah.
One of my favorite stories in the book is about Thomas Watson, the founder of IBM that built the company into what we know of IBM today. And at one point, an employee had lost the company $10 million, and that was back at a time when $10 million was a lot of money. And so he gets a call. He gets a call.
It's still a lot where I live.
He gets a call into Thomas Watson's office, and he's thinking, this is where it's all over. This is where I'm going to get fired. And Watson says, do you know why you're here today? And he says, well, sir, I assume it's because you're going to let me go. I lost $10 million in this project. And Tom Watson said, let you go? Are you kidding? I just spent $10 million educating you. That's the growth mindset.
That's good. That is, and we need in ministry in our businesses, we need that now as much as ever. Let me shift gears and ask you this. A lot of times, like in ministry, we can't figure out why people who come to church, they don't love the church as much as we do. They don't give like we hope they give, and they don't serve. And so it's easy for us to say, well, they don't really love God, or they're not really committed, or whatever. And in your book, you wrote something that I thought was really interesting. You explained that we might not have a person problem, but a situation problem. Chip, could you unpack that for me? What does that mean?
Yeah. So notice when we're making an assumption about somebody that they're not committed, that their relationship with God is not where it should be. We're attributing things to themselves, their personality, their spiritual life. We're not saying, I wonder what it is about their life and about their workplace that makes it hard for them to serve in this ministry. And psychologists have noticed this tendency for us to attribute things to people rather than to their situation so often that they have a label for it. They call it the fundamental attribution error, which is a bit of jargon that says this is common enough that people have come up with a term for it. And they say it's fundamental because we look at people, but we don't look at situations. One of my favorite experiments about this is a group of seminary students was asked to come to an experiment, and they were given the task of preparing a talk. That's something seminary students are used to doing. But then they were told that they had to go deliver that talk across campus. And on their way, the experimenters had programmed them to encounter a person that was slumped in a doorway. They were coughing and kind of seemed distressed somehow. And the question was, how many of those seminary students stopped to help the person in distress? It was a modern-day version of the parable about the Good Samaritan. Mm-hmm. And you think the seminary students are the good guys. So you're making a personality attribution. Of course they're going to stop. And in one case, our prediction is true. And in that case, what the experimenters told the seminary students was like, oh, it's a few minutes now before you'll have to give your talk, but go ahead and head over campus, and they'll be ready for you in a few minutes. And so that relaxed group of seminary students, 63% of them stopped and helped the person in the doorway. Another group of students were randomly assigned to an experimental condition where the experimenter at the appropriate time said, oh no, they were expecting you a few minutes ago. You're already late. Can you head over to the campus and take care of your talk? In that group, only 10% of the seminary students stopped and helped the person in distress. Now that's a big gap, 63% versus 10%. And notice it's the same people, it's the same group of people that had committed their life to ministry to others. And what we don't think in that situation when we're saying to predict the outcome of that experiment is how busy are they going to feel? How stressed for time are they going to feel in this helping situation? Now the implication for us is if we're thinking about, as leaders, about people and we're attributing things to their spiritual desires or to their personalities as Christians, that's probably wrong. Let's think more broadly about their situation. So probably a lot more people would tithe if we arranged for automatic deposit from their paychecks. Probably a lot more people would be available for service opportunities if we scheduled the service opportunities at lunchtime when people are free from work and other obligations. If we provided sandwiches for people to do that. So I think this gift of good leaders at thinking about the situation, rather than getting demoralized that I've got the wrong people on the bus or how do I motivate people, a lot of times, if the rider is trying to direct the elephant on the path, it's going to be easier for the rider to persuade the elephant if the path slopes downhill towards the goal. If you build a wall to wall off the banana trees from the elephant's gaze. So sculpting the path is an important part of creating effective change.
This is so helpful because so often when I'm working with church leaders, we tend to say our people won't do whatever. And I think if we reframe that and say we don't have a people problem, but maybe a situation problem, or maybe even just a leadership problem, maybe the reason they won't is because we haven't led them to. And reframing that, I think, can be so helpful. So if I'm hearing you guys correctly, you're saying that when change occurs, there's usually a predictable pattern.
Yeah, so take Dan's situation. As the older brother, I get to comment on his, his marriage proposal. It probably wasn't an appeal to the rider of his future spouse. The tax savings, the economies of scale in food preparation. What's effective in that situation is a deep emotional appeal. He said, I want to spend my life with you. I want to raise children with you. And those are identities like Crystal Jones with the first graders telling them they're going to be third graders. The reason we get married, the reason we have kids is because there's something deep and emotional and meaningful to us about that change. When change happens, it has a pattern. When change happens, it also directs the rider. So we have lots of examples. Our parents have had a long and very successful marriage. And so being able to look at them as a model, look around at friends that have had either successful or unsuccessful marriages and learn from them about how to direct that path and what to do and not to do. And then in terms of shaping the path, think of all the things that society does to make it easier for people to get married or have kids. So in marriage, you have a big party with all your friends, so they're witnessing your commitment to other people. We wear marriage rings to remind ourselves of our vows. We do get tax consequences from the federal government for encouraging this form. And so society has built in a lot of things to make this most profound of changes much easier. And for those of you that are married, that have kids, you've already gone through bigger, more stressful changes than you will ever go through in a workplace or in changing your communities. And so if we can reverse engineer those successful changes and think about what that tells us about the other changes in our life, we're going to be more successful as leaders.
So next time we see you, if you do your job, you're going to have a kid.
My parents are applauding at this moment,
There you go,
Craig.
Grandma. Okay. Well, let me just.
I'm going to have to rewind the tape and see what I committed to here, yeah.
There you go. You got witnesses. Let me just wrap this up and tell you both thank you, because when I read your book, I was facing some leadership challenges, and I honestly thought, I don't have what it takes to change these things. And God inspired me through your work to go in and change. And I just want to say to all of you at all of our Willow sites, if there's something that you're facing, I believe that God is going to speak to you and use the tools that you're obtaining now to help you overcome what you see as a challenge. The dip is actually a place to find some insight, and I'm going to be thankful to see the way God brings change. You guys have a tremendous work, and I'm very grateful for you. Would you please appreciate Chip and Dan?